Well, do you think he was a Mossad agent?
Probably, from everything I've seen, a joint CIA Mossad operation and British intelligence. Maha has turned out to be a Trojan horse. He's the Judas goat walking everybody into the control grid. You know, there's a point at which there's a point of no return. What Pfizer did, it's serial killing. Put them in prison for life, or you give them the death penalty.
And then you have like a different group of people with like Peter Thiel and Musk and Trump, which are, in my opinion, exactly the same as the other guys.
Bilderberg just met in Stockholm, and they had literally depopulation and immigration both on their agenda. Because this is not a one-off situation, this is a prototype. And that's why the Palantir technology is relevant. The control grid, is not yet in place, but the kill grid is. If you look at implementing the control grid, I think we are 2 to 5 years away from it completely being implemented and locked down if we don't stop it.
They know about the evil that they're doing.
They absolutely know. There's divine intelligence and there's demonic intelligence, and the demonic intelligence is way too important to them. They get too much power from it, and they're way too wrapped up in the occult.
Lieve vrienden, wat een reis. De Trueman Show is uitgegroeid tot een community van meer dan 100.000 abonnees op YouTube. En dat is allemaal te danken aan jullie. Dankjewel dat je kijkt, luistert, meedenkt en meereist. We gaan natuurlijk gewoon door met heel veel energie, met nieuwe gasten, diepe gesprekken en thema's die er echt toe doen. Elke week weer. En om dat te blijven doen, om onafhankelijk te blijven, om de podcast nog sterker te maken, mooier en impactvoller te maken, zijn we actief op zoek naar partners die deze missie willen ondersteunen. Samenwerkingen die kloppen, die waarde toevoegen. Voor jullie als luisteraar en kijker, voor de partners die aansluiten en voor ons als de Trueman Show. Dus heb je ook een bedrijf of merk dat resoneert met wat we doen? Stuur dan gerust een mailtje naar partners@thetruemanshow.com. We staan altijd open voor mooie verbindingen. En speciaal voor iedereen die liever naar de show kijkt zonder advertenties, ook aan jullie hebben we gedacht. Via het streamingplatform van That's the Spirit kan je namelijk al onze afleveringen bekijken zonder onderbrekingen. Geen advertenties, gewoon alleen het gesprek. En dat niet alleen, je kan hier ook het exclusieve segment Uncensored checken, waarin ik met gasten nog dieper duik en bepaalde thema's en exclusieve documentaires en films bekijken die je nergens anders ziet. Word nu lid via thatspirit.nu en probeer het nu 1 week gratis uit. Het mooie is, wanneer je lid wordt, steun je ook de show, het team en help je ons om de podcast verder te laten groeien. Enorm bedankt daarvoor. En dan nu heel veel plezier met de aflevering van deze week.
Let's see how it goes. I think we have a lot to discuss. I mean, lots of stuff is going on at the moment. I told it in the intro as well. Like, it seems everything goes so fast and so much is going on and on such a high speed. Is it the same for you as well? Maybe because you see it coming for so long, not?
Yeah, so I've seen this coming for a long. It's how a company, it goes along, you build, and then it goes up the S-curve.
Yeah.
So this has been building for 30 years. Now we go up the S-curve. So, but you could see it all along that it was coming.
But don't you, like, for me, like, after COVID, it felt like it was a little bit, like, more easy, probably because COVID was, like, such a big impact on the whole world. But now, since a couple of months, maybe a year or two, it's going fast again.
Well, but here's the thing. If you look at COVID was basically a way of keeping everybody busy or engaged while you put into place the last things you needed to do to go up the S-curve. So, and I could see those things coming. So it's not surprising. In other words, this was all expected.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand that it was expected, but then it still like can catch you off guard a little bit. Maybe not off guard, but
well, you can know that it's coming. At the same time, that doesn't remove the unpleasantness of riding up the S-curve. So it doesn't, I always think, because I've anticipated it, that I'll be able somehow to avoid the unpleasantness, but
not really. Maybe a little bit.
Here's the thing. I hate seeing people harmed. And I just came back from 2.5 months of driving around America and doing meet and greets. And when you see the harm, if you see the death and the disability and the maiming and the bankruptcy, it's really gruesome. So, and no matter how much that's going to happen, it's still hard to watch. So I'll give you an example. I had a wonderful subscriber who tried so hard to talk his family out of taking the injections,
Mm.
and his brother took it. He was seriously vaccine injured. He literally was not able to work. He lost his job. Now his house is in foreclosure, and he went to visit his brother. And he went to all the traditional doctors, and finally they determined he had MS, was the diagnosis. 3 times a week, a nurse comes to his house and gives him a 7-hour IV drip, and they ship the materials to the house, so the nurse gets it there, and the billings to the government paying for it, he's on disability now, so he can't work, and he can only function if he does this drip 3 days a week. Um, the government pays 52,000 a month for this. So, you're basically seeing him and his family bankrupted, you're seeing the country bankrupted, and this poor man is living in pain, living this way, completely disabled. And that story in that picture, and so here's the brother who's going to visit, and he tried desperately to talk him out of taking the injection and failed, and now this is the result.
And do they recognize it being from the vaccine?
I in that situation, I can't I didn't ask, has
Mm.
your brother faced what really
Mhm.
happened? Has the doctor faced what really happened? What you're seeing more and more throughout the country is more and more people are recognizing it. So if you look at the polls, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago, one of the leading pollsters said more than 50% of the American people knew someone who'd been killed by the vaccine.
Jeez.
So, so it's slowly being recognized, I think, is my guess.
Because I think that's, for me, one of the harshest things to look at is that people who get injured by the vaccine or lose like a parent or whatever because of the vaccine. And now you see the media talking about, well, so many people died this summer and we don't know how, and blah, 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 blah. Like the gaslighting when.
So the gaslighting is very bad. So what I would say about America, and I differentiate it from the Netherlands, but in America, there's a poisoning that's been going on since the mid-90s. I call it the Great Poisoning. And what's really interesting is if you look at our subscriber base, you see families who knew there was a poisoning going on and have worked very aggressively to protect themselves. And they are in amazingly good shape. And then there are families who haven't, and they are having all these things happen. And it's not just the pharmaceuticals, it's the water, it's the spray, it's all these, there are multiple things.
Mhm.
But there is this enormous divergence between the people who face what's going on and act successfully, and the people who don't face, they believe the gaslighting and then they just get drowned. And that's and you're seeing this bifurcation in the population, and part of the challenge is the ones who are seeing it and acting successfully are, one of their hardest, the drains on their heart is they're trying to protect and save the members in their family who buy the gaslighting, and they can't get them to see, and they don't understand why. And they're watching them go down, and it's a challenge because if your family failing in this way suddenly needs 1,000 hours of help a year from you, it could destroy you too. So they're struggling with, how do I how do I get them to protect themselves, and how do I get them to take effective action? And if I can't, how do I let them go? So that bifurcation in the population is causing just enormous heartbreak.
Mm.
Mooie mensen, ik wil graag wat delen over Modern Native. Zij hebben namelijk de wijsheid van onze voorouders in een modern jasje gestoken. Waarom waren onze voorouders gezonder dan wij zonder synthetische vitamines? De belangrijkste reden is heel simpel. Hun dieet zat vol met orgaanvlees, een bron van essentiële voedingsstoffen. Onze moderne voeding mist deze cruciale voedingsstoffen, waardoor veel mensen zich moe voelen, chronische stress ervaren en heel snel ziek worden. Modern Native heeft daarom de kracht van orgaanvlees in natuurlijke orgaansupplementen verwerkt die je lichaam herkent en goed opneemt. Een groot deel van de 15.000 tevreden Modern Native klanten merkt bij gebruik van de orgaansupplementen heel snel een verschil. Het resultaat: meer energie, een betere weerstand, gezonde haar en zelfs een boost in je libido. Dus ben jij benieuwd hoe de natuurlijke orgaansupplementen van Modern Native jou helpen? Ga dan naar modernnative.nl/orgaanmix voor meer info en gebruik de code TMS voor 10% korting op je aankoop.
What do you think of, now we're talking about this subject, what do you think of the whole Maha movement at this moment? Because for me, it's like so difficult to pinpoint.
So Maha has turned out to be a Trojan horse.
Mm,
It's just I don't know if you saw this. Kennedy just came out and he said his vision for everybody in America is they have a wearable,
wearable.
which means
Jeez.
he's the Judas goat walking everybody into the control grid. So, I think any hope that he was playing an inside game. My hope was he was playing an inside game and sort of making compromises so he could get something done, but what he's trying to he and Elon Musk are having a competition for who can get the most people into the control grid the fastest. So, do you know what a Judas goat is in livestock management?
No.
Okay. A Judas goat, you'll train a goat to walk all the sheep into the slaughterhouse. So here's the slaughterhouse, the Judas goat kind of walks in, and right at the end, he turns, and then the sheep go into the slaughterhouse. So his job is to steer people, and so I was hoping Kennedy was playing an inside game, but he's, based on what he said the other day, he's the Judas goat. And he and Musk are having a competition, I think, for making the control grid fashionable.
Yeah.
So
A couple of weeks ago, you had like this outburst of Musk and Trump, where I think, what did Musk do? He told that Trump was on the Epstein list as well. Yeah.
well, the thing was, he said the big beautiful bill was I forget his exact words, but basically said it was, I'm trying to think of the way to the big beautiful bill is one of the stinkiest pots of legislative evil that you've ever anyway, so I don't know what it was in the big beautiful bill because there's so many different things that could cause offense, but he was very critical, and, and that, I think, is what got started, and then he pointed out, as I would say, Trump's Epstein file is bigger than the Encyclopedia Britannica is the way I would describe it. So you being from the Netherlands might not know the Encyclopedia Britannica, but it's a huge, when we were kids, we had a, like 25 volume Encyclopedia Britannica. So yeah. So he and Epstein were best friends.
Trump.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. For a long time.
Well, you can see the pictures everywhere.
Well, the one I love is, so Epstein was basically part of the, Les Wexner operation, and Wexner bought him a house on East 71st Street. So I used to live I had an apartment on East 64th when I first got to New York, so it was my neighborhood. Anyway, so he bought him a house on East 71st Street, and then, um, after a relatively short time, he moved him next door to a much bigger house, which is the one you always see in the pictures of Epstein's house. The first house he sold to Howard Lutnick, who's the Secretary of Commerce and co-chairman of the transition team, right? So Lutnick for many years was Epstein's next door neighbor, which to me intuitively makes a lot of sense because Epstein was primarily a money laundering network, in my opinion. And so having a primary dealer, there are only 24 primary dealers in the New York Fed. And so having a primary dealer who's running the market in Treasury securities is a logical person to put next door. I'm assuming Wexner probably had tunnels built underneath. So anyway, I mean, the whole administration is full of Epstein people. So,
And how is he a money laundering operation?
so, here's my
Yeah.
conjecture on Epstein. Epstein, Bob Rubin, who was at the time National Economic Advisor, but then Secretary of the Treasury, introduced Epstein to Clinton. He took Epstein to the White House in 1994. And if you read Whitney Webb's wonderful books, One Nation Under Blackmail, she explains the whole thing. And I think from that time on, the number of times Epstein went to the White House was phenomenal. So then when Clinton, now in fiscal 1998, under Rubin, massive amounts of money start disappearing from the federal government, from HUD and DOD. And HUD is the mortgage market, right? And Epstein had all sorts of sort of interaction before and during with the mortgage market. Okay, so suddenly, fiscal 1998, massive amounts of money start disappearing from HUD and DOD. As soon as the Clinton administration is over, Epstein and Clinton immediately get on a plane and start flying around the world, and countries start donating massive amounts of money to the Clinton Foundation. Now, my guess is that that Epstein, because when you have to launder what was ultimately, that we know of by 2015, $21 trillion, laundering it, it's hard to put that just through pizza restaurants.
Sure.
So I think Enron was one of the operations they were using to launder it, is one of my guesses, and I did a lot of research at one point on Enron, but I think the other way they were laundering it was, the New York Fed, I'm just making this up out of thin air, so this is a guess. The New York Fed, behind sovereign immunity, can ship it to the BIS, it can sit on their balance sheet forever, but they can send it to Norway, and then Norway can donate it back to the Clinton Foundation, taking a fee. Because if you look at all the countries that donated massive amounts of money to the Clinton Foundation, why would they give all that money? Their own taxpayers' money to the Clinton Foundation. I think they were just probably laundering it through those countries, is my guess. Anyway, but if you look at the 21 trillion, Epstein's operation parallels that process of, basically a financial coup being engineered, and the need to launder huge amounts of money. And of course, we know that control files are very helpful if you want to launder that kind of money. So I don't think you could have ever stolen, or engineered the financial coup and massive amounts of money without control files. Now, there's a whole level of control file operations that's like getting all the government accountants to watch porn and then nailing them on it through the FBI, and that's one kind of operation. But then you have a much higher level of government officials, and people like Trump that need to be, worked at a much more sophisticated level. And that seemed to be his specialty.
Do you want the very best magazine with an exclusive discount to equip yourself against everything happening in the world right now and to gain the knowledge that will keep you safe in uncertain times? Catherine Austin Fitz has dedicated her life to exposing the financial and geopolitical forces that shape our lives, often operating behind the scenes. She shares all this knowledge through the Solari Report, a platform offering sharp analysis, unique interviews, and quarterly magazines available in print and digital formats. Want access to all the online content? Then the digital subscription is the ideal. Prefer to receive the wrap-ups in print as well? Choose the digital plus print option, starting with an exclusive 10% discount, which will save you up to almost $40. Subscribe via the link in the show notes to inform and empower yourself while supporting free and independent journalism.
And do you think that Epstein, first of all, do you think he was a Mossad agent?
I think that operation was very integrated with both US intelligence and Israeli intelligence. So I'm assuming it was probably, from everything I've seen, a joint CIA Mossad operation and British intelligence. So if you look from World War II on, how integrated British intelligence is with US intelligence, but if you also look at how British intelligence has used the Mossad and Israel as its proxy to do many things. So I'm assuming it was very integrated with British, Israeli, and US intelligence.
It is quite hard to distinguish those three, yeah. Those the Mossad, CIA, and the British.
Yeah, if they're operating on US territory, so if the Mossad is operating on US territory, it's hard to imagine it's not operating with complete approval of the US military and intelligence. The Larry Wilkinson just gave another interview where he talked about, the Secretary of Defense working for it, complaining that Mossad was controlling the Pentagon and running the running the Pentagon, and Wilkerson was talking about how Mossad was free to go in and out without IDs and other things at the Pentagon. They had the run of the Pentagon. So, so these are, in my experience, when it's on US soil, the US has phenomenally tight control, but, Mossad has free range to operate.
And So, like, you think do you believe that Trump was also like on the list of Epstein, with him, obviously all those other people as well, so that Epstein had some stuff on him, so that the CIA or maybe Mossad or who I don't care who, could control him,
So
can control him.
here's the thing. So I was targeted by the Department of Justice, and I'm assuming the covert operations were done by the CIA for because of a variety of stories I'm happy to tell you. But what I learned was I spent 11 years plus proving that the stories they made up about me were false. And so what that meant was I spent $6 million and 36,000 hours working for free to prove that the stuff they made up about me was false. So you can imagine, not everybody wants to do that. So the danger is not just that they have, dirt on you. The danger is even if they don't have dirt on you, they make it up. Okay, so they have the capacity to steal your time and your resources in a phenomenal way, and most people don't wanna deal with that or stand up to that. Especially now, if you look at what you're looking at with the Palantir Lavender system and what's going on in Iran, everybody's in the kill box. The control grid, is not yet in place, but the kill grid is, right? And
Mhm.
so not everybody wants to die. And that's why what I've never been able to understand, I mean, I can understand it intellectually, but I cannot fathom it without thinking about mind control. Why any person in America would think that changing the person from the uniparty who's inside the Oval Office is gonna do anything. If you understand how the system works and you understand how America is financially deeply dependent on illegal activities and war, and everybody want I told you the red button story, so I'll do anything to not have to tell the red button story again, but, America, everybody wants their check. To get the check, you have to engage in brutal force to keep the dollar system working and in war and in, getting cheap resources for free and all of this kind of stuff, so if everybody wants their check, what's the person in the Oval Office supposed to do, right? So everybody in America wants the story of I'm good. It's not me. I'm not doing this. We're going to Iraq or Iran to help the women be free. It's they want the story of I am good. But our model is deeply dependent on destructive activities, and that destruction has gotten so bad that we really are going to have to be forced to change the model because we're looking at arguably in Western history, the worst, you know, the worst misallocation of capital. I mean, that is the story of our world, is hideous misallocation of capital in the interest of central control.
Is that what we're looking at like all the time? The allocation of
All
the
the time, every time. When you walk down the street and you see how money's being spent in the local municipality, and you say, "That doesn't make any sense," it's almost always the misallocation of capital because money is being, created and spent or invested in a way that produces the control grid and central control and makes a few people who've figured out how to use the force, you know, more money. I mean, you have a giant sucking sound but it's very wasteful. It shrinks the pie, but it centralizes control of the pie.
Is it the same for what's going on now with the whole war rhetoric, and also the wars going on, like with Rutte? I think they made the deal like yesterday or something like that, a couple of days ago, that all the budgets, especially in the Netherlands, but all over Europe, should be increased. The amount of euros spent on defense, on war, and whatever.
Right.
Is that the same allocation of capital as well? Like the taxpayers'
Right.
money
So
going?
so that money is being spent for 2 things. One is to maintain the current global dollar system, which the West is, working off of, dollar and euro. So part of it is to assert control globally of the trade and markets, okay? But the other is to assert control of the domestic, population as you lower their economic footprint. So you're looking to, whether it's your use of resources or your access to resources, you're looking for more control on both. A lot of times wars are driven not by the need to go to war with your enemy, it's to control your domestic population. So you create a foreign boogeyman, you attack them, and then that gives you an excuse to lock down your domestic population or draft them all into the army, right? So, but if you look at what the dollar if you look at the Anglo-American alliance and you look at what our plan was to build a unipolar model. So when the Soviet Union went down, um, essentially the Americans said, we're now going to lead a unipolar model and we're going to be the world hegemon. And that was when I left the establishment. I said, this plan will fail. I want no part of it. Big mistake. Big, big mistake. And it was very much with Israel as the proxy in the Middle East in the lead in a way that was extremely damaging of US internal politics. So I said, I want nothing to do with this. I'm out. And what happened was if you look at that strategy, one of the stages of that strategy was the war in Ukraine. And the idea was we had basically imploded Russia in 89, 90. Russia had built back faster than we expected. We needed the Russian resources if we were going to maintain hegemony against China. And the Ukraine, the war, we lost the war in Ukraine. That failed. And so the unipolar model is now scrambling. What are we going to do? And one of the other stages was to assert control in the Middle East. If you lose the Ukraine, then you can't afford for Iran, China, Russia to trade oil and build energy capacity outside of the sanction system. So if the war in Iran has nothing to do with nuclear energy other than, we don't want them to have internal capacity to get energy from nuclear. We don't want them to have nuclear plants. Um, the big threat is that they have built the train tracks physically with the new railroad line and other things they're doing. They've built the train tracks physically and financially to escape the dollar system. And with China, Russia, and Iran outside the dollar system in a big way, it really threatens the dollar system. And that's what the current attack, the current squabble is all about.
So, because they lost the war in Ukraine, they had to move maybe faster than they wanted on Iran. Is that true?
It's hard to say. I mean, from the moment Trump got into office, he has been openly engaging the global audience in how we're going to reorganize the model. So if you lose Ukraine and you can't go east west, suddenly he's talking about getting Greenland and
Yeah.
Canada. And I was just up in Toronto and Montreal, and the Canadians really believe that Alberta is going to end, and even Saskatchewan may end up as part of the United States. Because what he's saying is, look, the oil and resources I needed by going east west and imploding Russia, I didn't get. So now I have to go north south. Right. That's what that, and then part of it is, the with the Arctic Circle opening up as, both sea lanes and for more resources, then there's a competition between the Russians, the Chinese, and the Americans over who controls the Arctic Circle, and we see, Trump now ordering lots of icebreakers because now we've got it, and that's part of why you want Greenland and Canada. So, so he's grappling with, "How do I get this model working?" And if you look at some of the things domestically, he's trying to figure out, okay, how do I get the model working domestically? Part of his problem is the great poisoning literally is wreaking havoc with the American finances. So let me describe this. The military budget this last year was 857 billion, and Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, wants to take it up to a trillion. The HHS budget, which is Medicare and Medicaid, last year was 1.8 trillion. And I just published an interview with Dr. Mark Skidmore on the Solari report. He said if we went back to 2010 levels of disability, we would drop that budget by $500 billion. Now, what's interesting is you have a much higher death rate. So the death rate is rising, life expectancy continues to fall. It's been falling for some time, but that's accelerating. And that's saving you money on Social Security and the pension funds, but it's losing you money on I told you the story. If one IV, you know, drip costs 52,000 a month and that's $600,000 plus a year for one disabled person. So it's a combination of both people getting sicker, but also if you look at our medical system, for example, the per capita cost of the Swiss system is 8,500, one of the most expensive in the world. The US is 13,500 per person. So the one of the reasons you see Kennedy talking about what he's talking about is the economics of the system don't work, and you're literally with the Great Poison, you're causing an extinction level event in the population, but you're also causing a bankruptcy of the country.
Wasn't that the plan to begin with, like the depopulation, right?
Right, right. So Bilderberg just met in Stockholm, and they had literally depopulation and immigration both on the as far as I know, it's the first time they literally used the word depopulation on their agenda.
It's funny. Well, it's not really funny, but I didn't know that officially the life expectancy was declining already. I mean, it makes total sense.
Well,
But
if you look at the charts that I've seen, and we have them up at the Solari report, you have if you take the 20 top industrial countries, they're all steadily going up, and then when the financial coup starts in the United States starts to diverge, but it's relatively dropping slowly, but it's not rising with the others, it's just dropping, and then in the pandemic, it falls off the cliff. And it's not from the numbers I've seen, Denny Rancor up in Canada has done a lot, it's not falling from a virus disease, it's dropping from the vaccines. So and if you look at the divergence post-COVID of the 19 countries with the United States, it's clearly a poisoning.
because that's always an argument when you tell people about this, like especially when you try to tell them like maybe our food isn't that healthy, or maybe our the medicine that we take aren't that good for us. Then like, but what you're talking about, because the life expectancy is always like increasing and we're getting older and older and healthier. But like obviously I know it's not true, but it's good to hear like it's really not true.
So I can't tell, I'm much closer to what's going on in the United States. I see what I see in the Netherlands is the food in the store is not as good as it was when I got here. But the quality of the food in the Netherlands is so much higher than the United States. It's very difficult for me to in any way complain because it's just like, you know, why complain about heaven, right? So the quality of the food here is very, very good. And in Europe, it's particularly Northern Europe, it's much better than in the United States. United States has been falling for some time.
Hmm.
Um, but we just did a great interview on the Solari Report, which we'll publish next week with Dr. Suzanne Humphreys. And it's called mRNA. Will we ever understand what the mysterious ingredients are? And because if you look at the spray above us, if you look at the food and you look at the pharmaceuticals, we keep finding these mysterious ingredients. And the question is, what are they and how do they relate to things like the Internet of Bodies? Because there is an effort, what I believe is there is a concerted effort across all these different areas, and we've seen it in the food too, to get bioengineered particles into our bodies. And that is very, very scary and concerning.
So you
So
think that's already happening through the food, for example?
it certainly is in the United States. And one of the things I will tell you, that's the GMOs and the pesticides are gruesome enough. If you look at what's happening with pesticides in the United States, Bayer is trying to get indemnification state by state and even federally for pesticide makers. So we know how well that worked for vaccine makers, giving them just carte blanche indemnification. They're trying to get that, and the states are having quite a legislative battle as the lobbyists come in and try and get indemnification. So, and it's very, very dangerous because we know how damaging and harmful the pesticides are. And of course, the reason they want it is they're getting sued. And my feeling is when you kill people, you should get sued. So
At least that.
at least that. So I'm a great believer, if there's a death penalty, here are corporations and here are humans. If a human kills another human, death penalty in America. If a corporation kills humans, no death penalty. They simply give a percent of the profits to the Department of Justice and go on killing.
Which he already calculated to begin with.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So, I'm a great believer that, for example, states have the ability to pull the license to operate. I think if a company is intentionally killing people, they ought to have their license to operate killed.
Do you think that the companies are intentionally killing people?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. Now, some companies, are not intentionally killing people, but they run dangerous businesses. The oil business is a difficult, dangerous business, and from what I've seen, the oil companies work very hard to do as much as they can for safety, but you have accidents, people die. So I'm not talking about that. Great companies make mistakes. They're human systems. And death happens, and that's understandable. But there are companies that absolutely they're serial killers. I mean, and that's the problem I have, when I wanna look at say, if you look at sort of the discussion in the United States about reforming pharma, my attitude is it's like reforming the Russian mob. Are you kidding me? That's we're not gonna there's a point at which there's a point of no return. And, these companies, in my experience, I mean, if you look at what Pfizer did, my 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 assessment of that is it's serial killing. I mean, you don't come back from mass atrocity, right? You don't reform. I mean, what do you do with a serial killer? You put them in prison for life or or you give them the death penalty.
Mm.
But you don't think you can reform them and let them keep running around.
Mm.
What's hard about that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's always hard to imagine, like, on which level they know about the evil that they're doing.
They absolutely know. It's something I've run large enterprises. I've run private companies. I've run government agencies. It's hard to engineer a mass atrocity. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of planning. You got to put stuff in the vials. You got to run. I mean, this is a big job. You can't just do this by accident. Do you know what I mean? This is not like a spontaneous combustion. This is a major, major operation. So
Yeah.
but it was also, it's been clear in the United States. Debbie Learman just published a book called The Deep State Goes Viral. And she does a remarkable job, as did Catherine Watt, of proving this is a military intelligence operation. This operation was won by the military, and Pfizer absolutely had permission, to not meet any of the FDA requirements.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a whistleblower who brought a whistleblower suit that lost because they said, the government wasn't defrauded, the government ran the fraud. That was the judge
Yeah.
saying, "No, the government wasn't defrauded, they were in charge of the fraud, they approved the fraud. This was an engineered fraud."
Can you tell a bit more about the Internet of Bodies? Because it's like a wild conspiracy in a way, but
No, 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 go to Purdue
oh
Engineering.
yeah,
Go to Purdue School of Engineering, they have a whole section of their website on the Internet of Bodies. This is not this is a major this is a major venture capital niche.
and that's where Kennedy comes in with his wearables.
Yeah, yeah, he just nominated as the Surgeon General of the United States someone who's never practiced medicine, but has a wearable company that wants to stick a wire under your skin to track you, right?
Yeah.
What about this is we don't This is like a livestock tagging system. I mean, I live in a farming community in the United States, and the thing that really helped me understand the control grid is I spent a lot of time around farmers understanding how they do livestock management. I started reading livestock management articles and magazines and really studying livestock management. And if you study livestock management, it's perfectly clear what they're doing.
It's funny that you say this because last couple of years I've been thinking a lot about this as well, and actually the way that we treat our dogs, because almost everyone owns a dog, so we know how we treat our dogs, like with vaccines when they are super young, getting chips in their body so we can
Right,
track where they are, etc., etc. That's exactly the same how the elite treats us as well.
right.
That's so insane when you think about it. Yeah.
I've spent a lot of time watching the elite, when I was still inside, watching the guys at the very top get frustrated because, you know, uh, one of the reasons they got frustrated was the corruption goes from the very bottom to the very top. And trying to run things clean when everybody, I mean, you could never create a political constituency in the United States for financial responsibility. Everybody would always support the criminal. I mean, go back, I told you this before. Remember the story of the crucifixion. Pontius Pilate knows it's bad politics to crucify Jesus. So he offers the crowd, you can let one go, and they choose the criminal, right? And in American campaigning, the criminal's the guy who promises you more free money. And he's the guy who wins. So the corrupt guy, the more corrupt you are, the more you're better your chances of winning. So, the guys at the top were very, very frustrated. And if you can, and here's what's interesting, the history of investment is the most profitable investment ever was slavery. Slavery is very, very profitable. And the problem with slavery, the last time around it got canceled, they couldn't perfect the collateral and they couldn't put down the Haitian rebellion. Now, with the Palantir system, you can put down the rebellion, and with chipping, you can perfect the collateral, which means if I'm a bank and Kennedy's got every one of the American people into a wearable, I can finance you at a 50% loan to value. And if you move states, I can identify, okay, you're my collateral. You can't beat the collateral system. So it solves the problems that they had with slavery historically. So we know from the sex slave and child trafficking that the people who run the planet believe in slavery, right? So
Aren't we already slaves?
I don't think so.
No?
No.
In a way, financially,
So there's a continuum of totally free to
totally enslaved.
totally
Yeah.
slave. And if you look at where we are on the continuum and where they want to go, you know, these are the good times. So enjoy it. Okay. And fight, because I'm not going there, and I'm telling you, death is not the worst thing that can happen. So you need to appreciate where we are.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit more? Because, I mean, the Palantir thing was quite a lot in the news the last couple of weeks, I think. So it seems like people getting also a little bit more aware of it as well, especially people who thought that Trump was on their side and Trump will be the savior of everything and everyone. It seems like with the whole Palantir thing coming a little bit more up, people are getting, well, at least a little bit more known about it.
So every 4 years, America goes through this madness where they waste a whole lot of time on the presidential campaign thinking it's going to make a difference, and they proceed to not spend time on the things that will make a difference. It's pretty tragic. Um, but it it seems to work for everybody. It's very entertaining. It's a form of theater, but you had a lot of people who and I give a lot of credit to the entrainment technology because, if you look at what Trump did in his first administration, why anybody thought that this guy would protect them from the control grid, I can't. I mean, he shut down 35% of the small businesses in America. He almost destroyed Main Street. So what?
You mean during COVID?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. and those policies had nothing to do with medical science or health. They were straight military, we're gonna shut down the economy. So the Fed injects $5 trillion and you offset that inflation by shutting down Main Street. And then the guys who get the $5 trillion can suck up and buy the assets of the guys who got shut down. I mean, what's not obvious about that? Okay. So why anybody thought now, one of the things we all like about Trump is that he got rid of there's a whole world of what's DEI and ESG and deeply offensive cultural stuff that is destroying our society and destroying our productivity. And so he got, he's basically anti those things. He's against pretending that women are men and pretending men are women, all that kind of stuff. So all that kind of I don't know, is there one word to describe it all? Um
Chaos,
yeah, so chaos
weirdness.
tactics,
Yeah.
cultural chaos.
Yeah.
So he blew out the cultural chaos and he returned Christmas to us, okay? And so there's a slice of what we all appreciate about Trump is that he he got rid of all that stuff. So and we're still working it out of the American system. And every time another corporate DEI officer gets fired, everybody cheers and it's deeply gratifying. So that's the one thing he has done, but when it comes to putting into place the nuts and bolts of the control grid, he's working at remarkable speed, his whole team is, and Kennedy's the perfect example of that. He wants everybody. I mean, it's enough that we're all carrying around smartphones, which are, um, it's a we're carrying our tracking and surveillance devices around with us, so
Yeah, that's it. That's what I was thinking about as well. Is like you almost don't even need a chip when everyone is always bringing their phone, right? I mean, you need it for the next step, but
right, but getting it in their body gives you much more ability, I believe, to influence their mind and control them, or kill them if you don't want them around, is my guess.
so. And do you think that we already getting those chemicals or those like the stuff that they need for the Internet of Bodies that we are already getting it in through the food and the vaccines?
So it's clearly in the vaccines. The only analysis I have of spray that confirms that it is the United States. So we just did an interview with Clifford Carnicom. Elsa von Hemlin did it. Very good interview. And what Clifford, he's been studying it for decades. And what he says is the bioengineered synthetic material in the spray is the same material as in the injections. So he's saying the mysterious ingredients in both the spray and the injections are one and the same stuff. So,
So then, where are we now when you have the scale from like say totally free and totally enslaved? At what like where on the scale are we at this moment? Do you think?
well, if you look at implementing the control grid, I think we are 2 to 5 years away from it completely being implemented and locked down if we don't stop it. But I think, it's back to the S-curve dynamic. The extent to which you feel your freedom impinged on is gonna increase radically over the next 3 to 5 years. And it's most people who've lived in the Western world cannot fathom what is planned. They cannot fathom, that when I'll tell them, "Okay, well, this will give them the ability to control what your credit card can buy or not buy," and I try to explain the fact that this is not some system of rules. The AI and software create a rule set just for you. So control and slavery happen one person at a time. And what I extract from you and your family is totally different what I extract from him and his family. It's a very custom, one by one person system. They can't fathom that that can happen here. They can't fathom that what that world is like. Because they'll say, "Well, I have nothing to hide." And, or I have no assets. They take my assets, I have no assets. And I say, "You have children. What if they take your children?"
They're already that far that we already almost don't own any assets anymore, except for the children, obviously. But right,
We people still own a lot of assets,
mm,
and, and there's a, inheritance process when the boomers die, there's a huge amount of assets that can move down. If it doesn't move down and it moves, into the government or private investors, that's an enormous amount of family wealth that is destroyed.
that's why they're taxing it that hard, or at least in the Netherlands, they're going to tax it even
Right,
harder now. The
right,
inheritance, well, what you earn of that.
right, right.
Where does like what's Palantir doing in this game?
So, I haven't studied Palantir carefully, but, from what I can tell, I started watching the Lavender System. The Lavender System is used, in Israel, was used, against the Palestinians, and, The Economist wrote an article, it was very interesting. It said that the beauty of using or the advantage of using the Lavender system is the software picks the targets. And so no military officer is legally liable if there's a violation of international law.
You can blame the AI.
You can blame the AI, you can blame the software. And there's a very interesting moment last year when Peter Thiel was questioned by students at Cambridge asking about the lavender system, and he kind of melts down because it was almost like he didn't realize, okay, you're going to be held responsible for this in the court of popular opinion because, this is being used to engineer an extermination and and people are connecting the dots. So it was kind of interesting, but the latest reports I'm getting from Iran indicate that they've been able using the SpaceX or the satellite systems. I'm assuming SpaceX is involved, but the satellite systems um, to extend lavalier across Iran. So when the Israelis attacked on June 13th, they assassinated, I think, 11 leaders. So it was both military leaders and nuclear scientists. And my reports, there's a very interesting report in Un's review on the assassinations, is that they killed them in their homes with their family, with neighbors. Apparently, they have the Israelis have the 8200 group has a defined group of how far out from the individual you can go. What's an acceptable kill? So it includes families and neighbors. And basically, we now have a war that is operating and can kill on a one person. It can surveil, track, and kill on an individual person one at a time. And that makes for a very different kind of strategy. So it's not just dropping a bomb in a neighborhood. You're talking about anybody who helps engineer the policies you don't like in Iran being targeted and having themselves, their family, and their neighbors killed.
And that's because the satellites, there's so many satellites at the moment in the sky. Obviously, Musk shoot a lot of them into the sky over the past
Right.
couple of years.
Right.
And that way we can track basically everyone everywhere
Right.
all the time.
Right.
And they're
But
testing
it's
it
not just in Iran, it's here too.
Mm,
In other words, we're talking about a global system. And it's interesting, there was one clip I'm thinking of using in the second quarter wrap up where Karp, who's the head of Palantir, says, you know, uh, to win at war, we have to have the edge. And the edge is, if you are opposed to us, then we kill you, we kill your family, we kill, and he's very aggressive about this, what I assume is this definition of what's an acceptable kill zone when you're going after one individual. So, it's really changing the rules of war in a very dramatic way. Now, what's interesting is we're in a situation where it has become impossible since all the parties to the war lie all the time. You have no idea. You get a lot of official announcements, but like the NATO guys say they're going to spend 5%. You know, that's the headline. What does it mean? Are they really going to do it? I have no idea.
mm,
Would you believe them?
yeah.
You believe him?
Well, what, increasing the budget, you mean?
Yeah. But to
Oh, no.
5%.
No, no, no.
I I don't I don't you don't know what anything means.
No.
It's a theater.
Yeah.
So I know what the script in the theater said. I just don't know so I go back. It's the Solari construct. There's an official reality, and then there's reality. So I know what NATO said the official reality is, but I have no idea how that translates into reality until I start seeing budgets and money spent. Now, let's go back to Palantir. When the Doge operation started, uh, I was concerned that the goal was just basically to privatize all the data. And, what was interesting is the Doge operation and they instead of going to the data you would get if you wanted to stop the fraud, they went immediately to the data you would get if you wanted to create a social credit system, right? Oh, like, like a heat-seeking missile. And, so it was pretty clear right off the bat what they were after. And, of course, the taking that data in the way that it was probably taken, so I think it was taken, but I can't prove that in a court of law. If you look at how it was taken, it's massive violation of all sorts of laws. So just now, if you look at Musk's operation, his attitude is, "I don't have to obey the law. The laws apply to me. I'm part of the breakaways. I don't have to do any of that." Anyway, so they go in, but right after they start, they make a deal between XAI. He's out in the market raising capital for XAI, which is a wild conflict of interest. But then he does a deal with XAI with Palantir. And Palantir's stock suddenly skyrockets to the moon. And that's when I said, oh, they're stealing the data. And they just gave it to Palantir. And then Trump comes back around. And so now you're taking in these huge amounts of data. I mean, just gigantic amounts of data. And so Palantir stock is going to the moon. And then Trump puts out a huge contract to Palantir to help them do analytics across all the data in the government, which says, okay, so not only have they stolen our data, but now we're paying them to manage the data they stole. And then he and Fannie and Freddie announces he's going to privatize Fannie and Freddie. And it was either he or Freddie and Fannie announced they're going to have Palantir underwrite all the mortgage packages. So now they're adding not only do they have Treasury, they have Social Security, they have IRS, but now they're adding all the housing data. And then meantime, they're over at HHS collecting the healthcare. So that's everything you would want to do a social credit system. And, I'm sure there's more, but I think Karp described it best. He said, we want to be the operating system of the US government. So, and what you're talking about doing is basically part of what you need to control grid is get rid of the civil service and replace them with corporate contractors. And that process has been going on for decades, but this is accelerating it even more.
Especially when I hear this story, like they played it so well. Like over like during COVID, you have like the left or whatever you call them, Democrats, with Biden, and then the Gates and everyone around them, and then with a group who was, I would say, waking up to that because they were feeling that it's wrong, and because of the S curve probably. And then you have like a different group of people with like Peter Thiel and Musk and Trump, which are, in my opinion, exactly the same as the other guys, only they portray themselves completely different, and they're there to scoop all the people up.
So, so here's what happened. So Musk went in and said, I'm going to cut $2 trillion off the budget. And everyone knew that's not possible unless you cut entitlements. And so it didn't, so we knew from the beginning that this is a show, this is not real. It's not serious. So that was step number 1. But the second thing is if you so my firm was when we were operating in Washington was the leader in sophisticated government reengineering. And if you look at how Musk and Doge came in to operate, they were not doing the things you would do if you wanted to seriously. So if you want to do shock and awe, and they did, the Trump administration said they wanted to do shock and awe. If you want to come in and do shock and awe, that's what you do. But shock and awe is not going to cut expenses because Congress ultimately will not respect what you've done. So it doesn't work. And so one, we knew the 2 trillion was just theater from the beginning, and then even when they cut it down to 1 trillion, that's theater. But we also knew they weren't serious about government reengineering because you weren't doing what you would do if you really wanted to reengineer government. What they were doing was they were doing shock and awe. Now, if what you want to do is just come in and steal the data, then that makes sense. You do a shock and awe, everybody's distracted, they think you're really doing the 2 trillion, and you get the data, and then you suddenly leave. And, they made it sound like he left because he and Trump started to fight. No, I think he left because he got what he came for.
The
It's what
data.
Yeah, that's what it looked like. Now, here's what's interesting. There's a short 17-minute video of of Musk's new installation in Memphis. So he built a huge data center and broke a lot of laws to get it done, just overrid everything. Tennessee let him do it. It's pretty shocking. And the question was, why so fast? Why so big? What's this all about? And I think it was literally so they would have the capacity to steal the data. So I think this was planned well in advance.
And that data goes to Palantir.
It goes to XAI and Palantir is what I'm assuming. And part of it is the steal. Now, Palantir has access to much more data than that, cross-government from these contracts, is what I'm assuming. And they had many contracts. They had IRS and many agencies beforehand. So I think, CARP is serious. He wants to be the operating system of the government. But it's back to this control model that can control one person at a time.
Hmm.
And of course, the question is, how do you get people to continue to pay taxes if what you're doing is basically outside the law? And a lot of what the federal government is, I mean, if you look at the federal government finances, they're way outside the law.
Can we do a short toilet break? Ja? Je kent dit vast wel. Je bent net geland, moe en geen internet. Dat moment dat je tijdens het reizen zo vaak hebt. En daarom is er gelukkig nu Celi. Celi is een eSIM-app, waardoor je geen gedoe meer hebt met losse simkaartjes of veel te dure roamingskosten. Je downloadt de app, kies je data-abonnement en bent direct online. Vooral omdat ik veel onderweg ben en meerdere landen bezoek, weet ik hoe fijn dit is. Geen gedoe met data of dure roamingkosten, gewoon steady bereik. Of je nou een tussenstop maakt in Singapore of op Bali zit, je blijft altijd online. En wat ook echt super chill is dat de app automatisch advertenties blokkeert, waardoor je superveel data bespaart. En Celi is echt veel goedkoper dan standaard roaming. Je bespaart dus ook veel geld. En als er iets is, kun je 24/7 bij de support terecht. Dus als je ook wil reizen zonder datagedoe, check Celi. Download de app via de QR-code op je scherm of ga naar celi.com/Trueman en gebruik de code Trueman voor 50% korting op je eerste aankoop. Meer info vind je in de show notes. I just read like a couple of maybe days ago that there's a Dutch company behind producing. They don't produce the chips, but they produce some kind of material thing that they use in the chips that powers all the AI and all the stuff.
Yeah.
And there's only one company in the world, ASML, I think it's the name, and that's based in the Netherlands.
Yeah, it's very significant.
It is, right? Because like I read even that China was trying to copy it, the technique, but no one is able to do it. And there's only that one company who produces everything for, I think basically
Everybody.
without it, you can't roll out the system that you just described, yeah?
Right.
Like, this is always what I think of, like, how is it possible that like one company, in this case from the Netherlands, I mean, tiny country, can get hold of such a technique which powers the whole agenda and everything that's going on?
Because one company starts and they get a lead and they get so far in the lead that it's hard for others to catch up. Although China, if you look at what's happened, one of the most significant things I think that's happening globally is at the end of, after 9/11, the Australian government created a think tank to track important technologies to national security. And they ended up tracking 64 technologies, and they just published a new report at the end of at the beginning of the financial crisis, so 2008. There were 64 technologies they were tracking, and the US led in 54, I think, or 50, no, 57, and China led in 6. Last year, China led in 60, and the US led, I think, in 4, and China was expected to overtake them.
Whoa.
Yes. And this is what is so shocking about both what NATO did and what the US is doing. Because basically, the tech bros in Silicon Valley are showing up and saying, because I think the deal was in the early, sort of mid 90s, you know, let us have big monopolies and we will assure global dominance in technology. And so we did. We allowed all these billionaires and we allowed all these big monopolies and, no antitrust law. And basically, they gave away the lead to China. So, we said, "Okay, we made you billionaires, we let you be billionaires, but you know something? You blew it." And so now they're saying, "Oh, give us even more money and give us, a monopoly of the US government and give us, taxpayer money and give us free reign and we'll get your lead back." And why do we trust these people to get the lead back?
Mm.
I don't trust them to get the lead back.
But don't you think that if the technique is so important, let's say, for example, with ASML, that the technique came from something, somewhere, someone?
So in the United States, I don't know if you've ever read The Day After, I think it's The Day After Roswell. It's a story of how a lot of the technology in Silicon Valley and a lot of companies was laundered out of the black budget. So basically, they took technology that was developed through the black budget and said, we have to get this into private hands. So we will move it out to all these different companies. And essentially, the thing that gave them their edge or their leadership was this extraordinarily powerful technology that got moved out of the government essentially for free. So I've been told several times by people I believe that they've tried to bring down the secrecy in the black budget and they try and figure out how to do it and they can. And one of the reasons they can is the legal liabilities of this kind of gifting of high tech out of the government. You can't get around the liabilities because these guys turned into billionaires because they got this gift. And why is that?
Yeah, for example, that could be happening or in the past with Facebook as well, or maybe the internet even.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was really funny because when I was when I had the company in Washington, um, I had my chief financial officer, who was fabulous, wanted to buy a personnel software system. And I kept saying, I don't want to spend money on it. So, and I don't want that company on our system for security reasons. And I said, look, we have an intranet. Let's just have every person in the company create a web page for themselves. We'll stitch them together, and that's our personnel system. And that way they update it, and we don't have to buy software and we don't have to update it. So when Facebook first launched, I said, "Oh, I know exactly what they're doing." We had a data servicing company that was doing. We had started a data servicing company so that we could get. We were taking people who were coming off welfare and training them how to do data servicing and shipping basically teleporting the jobs into poor neighborhoods because a lot of those people were very good, but they had daycare responsibilities or caregiving responsibilities for grandparents, so they needed they couldn't commute to work. So we said, "Let's create data servicing companies in residential areas, and we'll teleport the work into them." And it was surprisingly successful early on. And, but we did an analysis of what the data servicing needs were. And at that time, when they passed the Welfare Reform Act, they were projecting $6 billion of data servicing needs a year, and it was just exploding amounts of money. So when I saw Facebook, I said, "Oh, this is perfect. This is" they just get everybody to update their own file. Instead of the intelligence agencies tracking and having data servicing files, you just get everybody to make their own file. It's exactly what, we had planned to do. So, and a lot of times, you'll see the plan for a company like a Google or Facebook. It's very promoted out of the intelligence agencies. We have a great interview on Solari with there was a journalist in the UK who really studied the history of the relationship between some of these companies and the intelligence agencies. And it's always funny because they always David Hughes has this expression called sudden darlings. A sudden darling, oh, here's this genius from Harvard who miraculously built this company that goes like this. And it has nothing to do with the fact that he gave a backdoor to the NSA. Nothing to do with that. It's because he's a genius from Harvard. It's funny, but you get all these entrepreneurial stories that make no sense, but you
Well,
know.
and it's also for me, it's like when you realize that we always think that we're like the clever people who like invent like Facebook or the internet or whatever, and we fail to see that we didn't invent. I don't think that we really invent anything of it. It was given to us so that we can use it for their agenda, and everything that we think is progress is only to yeah.
So I think I asked you this before. Have you ever read Tim Wu's book, The Master Switch?
No.
Oh, so Tim Wu was a professor at Columbia, ran for lieutenant governor in New York, and he wrote a book called The Master Switch, which is a history of information technology. And he shows how a new technology comes out, and there's this wonderful blossoming period of innovation, and everybody says, "Oh, this is fabulous. We can do so many things. We can be free. We can build wealth. It's whatever." And so there's this period of innovation, and then suddenly, wham! It's all centralized, and you get more central control. And then a new one, and it's the same thing as like, and then wham! And he goes through the telegram, he goes through the telegraph, he goes through the phone, he goes through radio, he goes through TV, he goes through the internet. And what you realize is, somebody's always back there ready to go. And it was funny on Wall Street, there was a firm on Wall Street where the guys who did the management of the young people would tell me, he said, "What we do is we take 20 young people, we give them all the same assignment. Then they start competing with each other when they find out that they're all doing the same assignment. And then it gets really brutal and they knock each other off and compete and whatever. And then we pick the best one. And by doing that process, we get a better result than if we just assigned it to one person."
Right.
So, right. So they find this period of innovation, where you go from 4,000 car companies to 2 or 3, so they think you get a better result and you go faster.
I can imagine that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the Mr. Global believes in prototyping. So crypto, if you want a digital control system, you need an all digital transaction system. And the way to figure out how to build that is to get all these wonderful freedom fighting entrepreneurs to prototype crypto, right? It's like, here we go again.
That's a message. We talked about it in the last conversation as well, and I think it's really good to talk about the topic again today because obviously we're full power now.
Oh, but America is planning on rolling out stablecoins. And we're talking about a tsunami that if they succeed, now the BIS just came out with a big criticism of America's stablecoin. So now we have I call it the Midianite thing. The gods are warring if the BIS and the Trump administration are fighting about stablecoins. It's very interesting. Anyway, but the Americans are planning. Do you know what they're up to on stablecoins?
Tell me.
So you know how a stablecoin works,
Hmm.
right? Okay, so the Americans just passed the Genius Act in the Senate, and they have to pass the Stable Act, which is the corollary in the House, and then they'll do a reconciliation. But I think they want that done by the fourth quarter. Basically, if you look at the current construct, and it could evolve, so take it with a grain of salt. Instead of the New York Fed doing a CBDC, the banks that own the New York Fed will create subsidiaries and either together or individually will do stablecoins. So it's kind of like meet the new boss, same as the old boss, but it looks different, right?
Mhm.
And here's what's interesting, by doing it through subsidiaries of their companies, they are free of a lot of the constraints and congressional oversight of a CBDC. So if you wanna be really evil, it's a better construct than CBDC. Anyway, so but what their plan is, the stable coins will be able to market through the mobile payment systems globally. And one of the ways they want to encourage people to use stablecoins is by freely offering credit. So if you are a small farmer anywhere in the world, they want to offer you credit to borrow money in stablecoins and use stablecoins. And this is a way of routing around the traditional banking systems. And they're hoping is it builds a big new market for US Treasuries. And Circle just did an IPO. It's one of the companies working on stablecoins. They just did an IPO at 31 and shot up to 107, in a week. So the market is very excited about stablecoins. Anyway, but if you haven't seen the new movie, and I don't recommend this as an entertainment project, but there's a new movie called G20 where the US president goes to, the G20 meeting in South Africa, and I would note that the G20 meeting this year is in South Africa in November. She goes to the G20 meeting, and she's attacked by terrorists who are pumping a different crypto. She's trying to market the stablecoin, um, plan to loan money and free farmers worldwide. And it's a very dreadful movie, but you kinda see the US plan for, um basically, this is our new round of inflation, just pumping trillions of dollars out globally. And the goal, of course, is any country you can access through the mobile payment systems get off their local currency and get them into the stable coins, which brings them into the dollar. And this will give new life to both the dollar trading market and the treasury market.
So, but it's not the plan for the stablecoins to come and like erase the dollar, like instead of the dollar.
No, it's to rejuvenate the dollar and the treasury market. So you're trying to significantly remember the Iraqi pallets of cash where they would just ship over. Okay, so this is the digital equivalent of the Iraqi pallets of cash. It's very clever because you're saying to everybody in the world, if you have a mobile phone, then you can use dollars
By using the stablecoins.
by using the stable coins.
And the stablecoins, for example, XRP, USDT, like those kind of,
Right.
yeah.
Now, the question is, how will those stablecoins do vis-a-vis the owners of the New York Fed? So if Citigroup and JP Morgan and Bank of New York are creating stablecoins through their subsidiaries. And the beauty, if I read the Genius Act correctly, the beauty for the banks is now they can pump out trillions of dollars without needing deposit insurance. So, and we'll see if the collateral system really works. Part of the Genius Act is a tight auditing of the collateral, making sure that the dollar that went into the stablecoin is really 100% collateralized with treasuries or bank accounts. Now, the West has never, ever created a collateral system that they didn't ultimately game. So I'm not sure how this is going to work. But if it works, you're talking about significantly growing the dollar market share. And you're gonna do it in a way which is wildly inflationary, but you can hide the inflation behind stable coins versus the traditional banking system.
So, because when the plan is social credit score, yeah, and with Palantir and stuff and everything we discussed, I think we're quite close by. Um, then when you talk about plans, everyone says that the next step or like one step to get the social credit score in is a CBDC, right?
You can do it with stable coins. All you need, the first thing you need, more important than the CBDC, is the digital ID. So in the US, the Trump administration is pushing the real ID like crazy. and they're really working hard to get everybody on the real ID.
A real ID is a digital ID in the States.
Um, it's for most people now, it's not used as a digital ID because it is digital, but it's they're doing it through the driver's license, and the driver's license is a card. Interestingly enough, you get a yellow gold star. It's very interesting if you look at the symbology. It's, actually, it's a gold circle with a white star in it, but there's variation between the states, but they're doing it through the states. So they're really pushing hard to get the real ID, and the population is pushing back. They're not buying it. So and there's a lot of lying and nudging going on, so it's a big food fight, but the first thing you need is the digital ID. The second thing you need is you need the social credit system that can be integrated with bank accounts, with credit cards, and with a stable coin if it's done privately or a CBDC, either way. So now what's interesting is the Fed has been slow walking the CBDC, and you even have one of the presidents of the Federal Reserve saying, "Why would America ever let this happen? This is terrible." So I don't think I think there are a lot of people at the Fed, and in the financial system who are not so excited about going into a slavery system.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. I don't think they have full on, um it's really funny because, and I know you experience this all the time, but I'm constantly seeing people say, "When Fitz said this in 2017, I just said that can't possibly be true," and she said it in 2019, and I said, "I really hope that's not true," and then she said it in 2021, and I was like, and now here I am, and it's like, "Oh, shit, it's really true." Do you know what I mean? So, as that happens to people, they're not on board for this, and, now it's interesting, I wanted to bring up one of the most interesting articles that I have seen so far this year was a editorial in the Tehran Times just last week that said, okay, and it was sort of a message in it to all the countries around them in the Middle East. If you're buying treasury securities, you're financing this and you are accountable and responsible. And it was basically integrating accountability in a new and very important way. And basically raising the question of, do you want to be in the dollar system? Because the way the dollar system is working, is to fly satellites around, and if you don't do what you said, to zap you. Is that really the system you want to finance? Because you are financing it. And I thought it was interesting because for so many years, I've watched people go to work and build the control grid or put their money, their savings, whether it's where they're banking or the stocks they're buying, they're financing the control grid. And, my message is this really what you wanna is this the world you wanna build for your children?
Mhm.
And we have the power to stop doing it. We really do. But it requires integrating how your time works, how your money works, how your purchases work, how your life works. Are you supporting the thing you say you don't want?
But it's quite hard also, yeah, because our tax money also, like, helps it, to say the least.
Your tax money helps it, but we are not without the ability to ask questions and put pressure on the tax system. Now, the problem is the Netherlands is part of a group, whether you call it the G20 nations or the NATO or any of these things. You're part of a system. And there was a magical moment a couple years ago when the former president of Finland said, "There's no more room for the non-aligned." In other words, we can't stay independent. You've got to be on one side or the other. And unfortunately, and that's the problem if you're the Netherlands. The Netherlands has done, in my opinion, a remarkable job of trying to navigate the middle of the road and get along with everybody. And part of it is you have such an incredible investment history, investing and trading with everybody. So, but it's hard because if you're going to be a member of NATO, if you're going to be part of the Western Syndicate, and the Western Syndicate is moving in these ways, you have to move with them. And that's the tension if you're running the government in the Netherlands.
That's funny because I always have somehow the feeling that we in the Netherlands are actually quite um, walking like in the top of countries who are implementing this whole like digital
When it comes to the
insaneness.
food, yeah, you so if you we published Elsa's, Pharma Food, which is quite remarkable, and if you look at the destruction of the so we published Dutch Farmers and Fishermen and Pharma Food, and if you look at your leadership in destroying your food supply, it's quite remarkable, especially since, you could argue the Netherlands, certainly when I arrived here, had the finest food system in the world.
Mm,
Why would you wanna destroy it? It's a mystery to me, but, they're doing it.
and they want to own the land, right?
Well, but
Destroying the farmers.
what's happening is you're implementing a process where you want you're moving from the food supply being managed and operated in the land owned by farmers and fishermen to a world where it's totally corporate controlled. But you're manufacturing fake food. And the question is why? And if you look at what we're doing, and I presume it's with pesticides and telecommunications, you're basically killing off the insects. But you're saying, okay, we can grow insects in the factory and eat them. So you are, um, and if you look at what you're doing to soil with pesticides, I mean, so you're basically destroying agriculture, and on the theory that you can make all of this in factories under corporate control. And if you read Pharma Food, what you'll discover is the vision and the economics are so insane you can't imagine why anybody would do this. Now, in my experience, the people who run the financial system are quite intelligent and logical. So the question for me is, why do they think this is a good idea? Other than complete corporate control of food supply, just gives you better control,
Hmm. Well, that's a good reason, right?
right? So I don't know. Have you read Pharma Food yet?
No, not yet.
Oh well, if you want to go on a diet, it's perfect. So I'll never forget when Elsa gave us the first draft. It was the only time in my life that I couldn't finish something in one sitting because it was so upsetting. And I said to Elsa and the whole team, this is going to be the least popular thing we ever publish. Nobody's going to read this. Nobody would voluntarily. It's so horrible. It's so disgusting. And it turned out to be wildly successful. I was completely dead wrong. And the reason was best described by one subscriber who wrote me, and she said, for 20 years, I've been trying to get my husband to go along with buying local food. And he said, no, it's too expensive. It's too complicated. It's too hard. I don't want to do it. So I gave him Pharma Food, and he came back and he said, honey, I'm all in. What can I do to help?
Mm,
So the fresh food people used it to market, and it was wildly successful and very popular. So, but when you read it, what you realize is the only way you could ever get anybody to eat this stuff is either they're totally brainwashed and mind controlled, or they're just controlled and their money will only work to buy this. So, but if you want to know why I say that death is not the worst thing that can happen, read Pharma Food.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, and one of the ways of controlling people how to buy, what to buy is the social credit score and this, and well, CBDC or maybe a different
Well,
variation on that.
it's an all remember, the danger is a 100% digital transaction system. So, there are many different ways you do it with a stable coin or CBDC or whatever, but what you wanna prevent, you wanna rebuild analog. So what we need an ideal financial system would be a balance of analog and digital. So do everything you can to preserve cash. I mean, preserve cash, preserve checks, preserve anything analog. And it's not just in the financial transaction space. Part of navigating the system is you want your mind to be clear. And so you don't we're all ingesting mind control, but there's a lot you can do to protect yourself. So I first started to deal with it very openly because as an investment advisor, people were being encouraged to do fraudulent investments. and or do fraudulent purchases. They were being persuaded to buy things they couldn't afford. So so I had to deal with it because the only way I could talk somebody out of a fraudulent investment in some cases was understanding that this technology was real and how they were getting tricked. So, you know, so part of navigating this is not letting ourselves get tricked into this stuff.
And what about, because I think in Europe they are quite fond of the CBDC still, and as it looks now, they will try the first testing with it like next year or something like
October.
that?
No, they
October.
said they're rolling it out in October.
Yeah, so
So I'm assuming it's a prototype.
probably.
Yeah.
Um, but how does it differ? Like for me, sometimes I get the feeling, and maybe you have the same as well, is that America, the States, they seem like there's change. Trump with the people around him, and so that the people, especially in the Netherlands, also I think a lot of people are really fond of what Trump is doing, and they really believe that he will implement some change. And here it's like full on everything CBDCs. They don't even like care about.
So here, I think the government wants to continue to do things through the established institution. And what the Trump administration is saying is we're going to let this all go private. So the banks can do this privately. We're going to turn the government over to private companies. We're going to have the tech bros, break and redo the currency. So he's full on private. And not only is he full on private, his message is, you know, we're open for grift nation. So not only can you do it privately, but you can line your pockets, and you can line your pockets with amazing amounts of government money. So it's full on, I don't know, it's kind of like pirate nation. It's the only way I can describe it. And of course that inspires lots of people trying things and lots of innovation because anything goes, right? And the message from the Department of Justice is, full on Epstein, go, go, go. You know? So so that leads to this kind of crazy blossoming, right?
Mhm.
Whereas Europe is like, "No, we don't want, uh, we don't want private entrepreneurs pumping and dumping the currency system, etcetera." So you get less money going into innovation, less whatever, but you also don't get the kind of messes and craziness. So I don't know if you saw this. So Jeff Bezos is getting married. I
Mhm.
don't know if you're aware of
No.
this. So the New York Post, I wasn't aware of this, but the New York Post put up a video 2 days ago saying, they live streamed for 2.5 hours, the boats bringing in Bezos's guests to the wedding. And then the next day there was a video that a dummy doll of Bezos had been put into the canals and an announcement that Bezos has now moving the wedding because the protests in Venice have been so great. And, so what I see is, uh, you have a population who is really getting very angry about billionaires because the clear message is the billionaires didn't become billionaires. Many billionaires did not become billionaires because they worked hard and were smarter and lucky. They became billionaires because they were better at stealing government money. So, it's the level of criminality and government subsidy to create these billionaires is and the failure to perform.
Mm.
So it's one thing if you held the lead globally, I think there'd be a lot less public discomfort. It's one thing to, you know, allow somebody to become a billionaire with government money and then they fail.
Mhm.
And then so your solution to help them succeed is to double down and give them more money. It's like, wait a minute, what do we need these guys for?
But does Mr. Global, as you call it, need both of the approaches?
Probably. The usually
But it comes in handy, right? It comes in handy that people really believe that the Trump administration will do something good for like the freedom movement, or how you want to call it, that they oppose the CBDCs because that's what he says. But then through the back door, they use the stablecoins. That Musk opposes guys like Gates and want to do stuff differently, but then through the back door, they do basically exactly the same. You know, is it like a facade to make us believe that there's coming some change from those guys?
So, yeah, so if you want the control grid built fast, then you want a whole segment of the population to believe that somehow Trump's good. So it's just another gaslight. And so so it's just somebody just sent me a report on a meeting in the heartland, and a couple showed up. They're not hilarious report subscribers because they hate what Catherine says about Trump. So, oh no, I mean, you every 4 years I go through, we go through a purge of people basically firing us because they hate what we're saying about some member of the Uniparty. And but I hate to say this, we always turn out to be right. So
Yeah, and I think now it's obvious, but it's also super well engineered and well played at the same time as well.
I have to tell you, the marketing of the Trump group on the control grid is absolutely first rate.
Right.
I don't know who's doing their PR. They're doing a great job. I mean, you can't believe that anybody would buy this, but I don't know how much is disinformation, how much is propaganda, how much is PR, how much is mind control.
Hmm.
But the gaslighting is, I've never seen more extreme gaslighting than than this.
And when you look at the point of view of Mr. Global, yeah, we were talking about Ukraine and Russia, and now Israel and Iran and the Middle East. Um, because we did some podcasts the last couple of weeks. There were also, because there's so much going on now in the Middle East, about the Middle East, and also about Russia and Ukraine. And at one level, I can see that they're, well, fighting and differences, but at the same time, I always believe like it's also some kind of theater as well. That
Absolutely.
behind the scenes, they all want the same goal, basically.
So, uh, well, there are many theater aspects. Let me just bring up something because it's always hard to, as I said, we do these quarterly analysis, and it's always hard to decide. Okay, what's going on that's really important, and I think one of the most important things happening right now is basically the genocide in Gaza, because this is the world's first live stream genocide. And Rwanda was not, as far as I know, live streamed, and this is live streamed. And Harvard just came out and said that I think the death count, they have up to 362,000, and I can't believe it's not much higher.
Hmm.
And one of the first questions I asked on June 13th when Israel attacked Iran was, is the goal here to distract from, the last push to exterminate these people? Because you've now got a real famine situation, and you can get, Israel announced it was going to be 2-week war in Iran. In 2 weeks, if you're in famine condition, you can get a lot of die off. And our reports from the Middle East, and I'm trying to confirm them, so I don't know if this is true, was that as soon as they started to attack Iran, they turned off the lights in Gaza and started bombing. So, my question, because this is absolutely extraordinary that the world would let this happen. And they would let this happen when literally you have the US president announcing he's gonna do a hotel and turn this into a resort, and his son-in-law is saying he's gonna do waterfront development, and you have Netanyahu floating, development plans showing this new wonderful Gaza. Now, I've always assumed they need the land, the water, the oil and gas, the resources to do the control grid, because that's a area where they wanna do a lot of infrastructure for the control grid. But you're literally saying, "Okay, we want the land, we want the oil, we want the water, so we're just gonna exterminate the people there and take it." And not only that, we're gonna cut all of the surrounding countries in on a piece of the action. We're gonna cut the president in on a hotel. We're basically gonna have everybody making money on killing these people and taking their stuff. And there's a wonderful article that someone published last year that we keep bringing back. It's called Gaza is a Method. And it's what it was saying is, look, you've used the Palestinians to prototype the 15-minute cities, and now you're using them to prototype the land grab. And if we let this happen, it's gonna come, it's this is not gonna stop here. If we let this go down, it's gonna keep happening around the world because this is not w a one-off situation, this is a prototype, and that's why the Palantir technology is relevant. So, I think the most important thing that is happening is will the world let this happen?
In Palestine,
Yeah,
in Gaza.
yeah. Because the message is going to be, okay, we you know, if you look at how we're controlling and you look at how we're propagandizing or we're mind controlling, we can now get away with this. And if we can now get away with this, then we can roll this out worldwide. And if we let this happen, this is coming.
I also read that the whole occupation of Gaza and is also to test the lavender system as well. To
Right. So they've been developing and building and yeah. So Mr. Global is a prototyper. He's always prototyping. And I think whether it's the extermination or the lavender system and the 15-minute cities, I think this is all a prototype. And that's why, we have to understand if it can be done to one, it can be done to everybody. It's funny if you look at sort of who we're dealing with here, a lot of those people were very present in my litigation with so I made the mistake of trying to stop the mortgage bubble. And so I was trying to stop all the corruption in the mortgage system in the US. And if you look at who came after me and what that fight was about, there are tremendous parallels with who's doing this. And it was funny. I remember saying to my general counsel way back then, crime that pays is crime that stays. If we don't stop it now, it's just going to spread. And now I'm literally watching, the same syndicates destroy the world. So it did spread.
don't you think it's for me like this is where I can't really wrap my head around yet? The fact that there's so many pro-Palestine news, well, not since Iran, but before that, the mainstream media was reporting actually quite in the Netherlands. I'm not sure how it is in the US, but in the Netherlands, and there was people were like really like getting more pro-Palestine. Actually, the people on the left are getting more pro-Palestine, and the right, whatever that means, are like always pro-Israel in this case, and the sentiment is like changing a little bit, not a little bit, it's changing.
So right before Israel attacked Iran, you had the Financial Times come out critical of Israel. Because um, if you look at Israel's excuse for exterminating the Palestinian people, they never said we want the land, we want the oil and gas, we want the water. They said, "Oh, we're having a war with Hamas." Now, you don't have snipers sit and kill children systematically to take out Hamas. I mean, to me, it's just the whole thing is ridiculous. But what was happening was there was a significant turn against Israel from traditionally supportive uh, sources. So to see the Financial Times and there were others, but that was the one I really said, okay, Israel's got a real problem now. And so one of the questions, you know, these kinds of events always stack functions was one of the reasons they went to war with Iran to distract.
Mm,
And could the distraction be to distract against, because the problem with the Financial Times and these various people turning against you is, you started a process and the process won't work unless you go all the way, but you're in the middle of the process and you've got to finish it off. And if they're all turning against you before you finish it off, how are you going to finish it off? Well, a war with Iran would be the distraction you might need to finish it off.
mm. And so I was asking a question earlier as well, like from the Mr. Global point of view, isn't the leader of Iran and let's say Putin or aren't they all playing the same game?
Well, it's a little bit like Wall Street. They're competing and they're cooperating, so, um, I think the US really I think if you take the British-Israeli-US alliance, they really did wanna implode Russia again, and they weren't able to, and I think that was a real tension. Now, I'm not saying a lot going on there isn't theater, but, and Putin, it looks to me like Putin has gotten help from the West. The $64,000 question to me is the Russians were able for the first time globally to beat the US hybrid warfare strategy. And the question is how? How did they do it? And that's, were they able to stop the electronics from going into Russia? Are they able to keep the Lavender system out? Are they able, how did they beat the hybrid warfare? I don't know that yet. And that's what they because basically they played in Ukraine, they played a conventional game. The US was planning on hybrid warfare, and the hybrid warfare game failed. They couldn't pull the rug out from under Putin.
But the West needs uh, a Putin kind of guy, right? Because without him, without the threat of a Putin or a Xi Jinping or I don't care who, or in the Middle East, like the bad Muslims.
Right, so they need a boogeyman,
Yeah.
but it could have been somebody else. I mean, I think they would much prefer to implode Russia, than need a Russian as the boogeyman. There is I will say this, the hatred of Russia is very, very significant, and it's a sincere hatred. And, of course, the question is why.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Russia's a real threat. Um, you know, the city has always seen Russia as a real threat. So if you look at the history of how they destroyed the Tsar or what happened in World War I or what happened in World War II, the the Anglo-American alliance has been trying to basically brutalize Russia for a long, long time. It's a very ugly history.
But is that something that Mr. Global would like to see? Or
I don't understand it other than you have a country that umbrellas both Asia and Europe and is right in the Arctic Circle. So if you look at how powerful it is in terms of geopolitical geography, they have an immense position. And so if you want to control the planet, you want to control that position.
so that's Mr. Global wants to control or controls Russia as well,
Right.
right? It
Right.
already does. You
Who
never
is
know.
Mr. Global?
Yeah,
Well,
exactly. Well, who is it?
so so that's the $64,000 question. Who is Mr. Global and why is Mr. Global afraid? If you look at Mr. Global's risk management, why is Mr. Global centralizing control in this way? And what is it that Mr. Global is so afraid of? It doesn't, you know, it's a mystery.
And what do you think?
So I think the planet is run by the representatives of intergenerational pools of capital. And I think they're very concerned about being able to manage that system. One of the advantages of AI, they could say the AI is running the system and they can blame the AI for everything. Um, there's such a small group of people and it's so dangerous if, everybody sees who they are and gets angry at them. But I also think they're worried about geophysical risks. So I think they're worried about, nuclear accidents. I think they're worried about mass immigration. I think so if you go through we have a section on the Slay Report Quarterly where we do unanswered questions, and at various times we've gone through all the geophysical risks of what could hurt or destroy the planet. I think they're clearly worried about geophysical risks. So, and it's funny, my whole argument in the 90s was let's change the model so that we can take this new technology and build explosive amounts of wealth. And, and so there's a way to do this, which is sort of a win-win model. And I think their attitude was, let's take it and get total control because we don't trust people. I think um, they're very concerned about what it's going to be like to manage a population this big, and they think the population has gotten too big. They want to see it diminished.
Do you think at the very top they're human?
I think they're either I clearly think Mr. Global is human, and it's a human committee. Now, are they interacting with other civilizations? You know, if you look at the financial system, it's clearly acting like an open system, not a closed system. But those other civilizations could be human, just descendants of humans. So, we have a great interview with Farrell called Who is Mr. Global, where we go through all the theories of who Mr. Global is. I do think that they are heavily influenced by the occult. So I would say that we are interacting with other dimensions. And this is much if we are interacting with other civilizations, it is the dimensions that are having the biggest impact. And I think they are way over influenced by the occult. So I think there's a lot of, there's divine intelligence and there's demonic intelligence, and the demonic intelligence is way too important to them. They get too much power from it, and they're way too wrapped up in the occult. Is my take on things.
Because that's when you start digging, um, then it doesn't take long for you to see, let's call them conspiracy theories about satanic, demonic kind of uh,
Right,
behavior in the elites.
right. So I just have to get this off my
Yeah.
chest. So I I grew up in a world where the fundamental operating principle of building the future was conspiracies. We didn't call them conspiracies. We just, we would get together, we would make a plan, then we would sneak around and implement the plan, and you didn't tell anybody because, and most of them were legal. They weren't illegal, but conspiracies were how you got things done in this world, right? And they were beautiful things. You know, we all wanted to be better at conspiracies than anybody else, okay? And so, I always considered myself a conspiracy foot soldier, you know? And if you come to to Solari, we often say, don't ask if there's a conspiracy. If you're not in one, you need to start one. And I really believe that part of teaching people how to be powerless is to have them turn the word conspiracy into a pejorative. Okay? Because if you're not in a conspiracy and if you're not implementing conspiracies, you're not in the game. It's like get in the game.
Hmm.
So, um, you know, there at any given time there are millions of conspiracies operating on this planet because that's how the guys who are running the planet build their future. So,
Yeah, yeah, I can definitely see that. But yeah. So, but do you think it's true? That was the question. Do you think it's true that about the demonic, satanic kind of way how they
I
run?
know it's true.
Mm,
I used to be inside. Of course it's true. Now, where it all comes from, how it all works, and what's going on now, I don't know. I'm out. But
luckily.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think by getting booted out, it saved my life. So I would have kept going to doctors. That would have killed me. So anyway, but uh, and I think but if you look at each one of us in our lives, the question for each one of us is are we allowing ourselves to have divine intelligence work through us, or are we allowing ourselves to be influenced or sold the demonic? So, and because the more we all permit the demonic into our homes and into our minds and into our lives, we give it food, we grow it. So,
And that's also where the power lies, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So you went on Tucker a couple of months ago,
Yeah,
maybe already.
uh-huh.
How was that?
Something, I had a blast. I had, I've always wanted to meet his wife because Tucker tells you that his wife is like the most wonderful woman in the world, and she is. She really, named Susie. And so we had dinner the night before. So a wonderful friend went to the same school they went to. So we had dinner and had a blast. And then we went and interviewed and just talked and talked and talked. And then my friends were staying at Tucker's house. I was staying in a local hotel. And so we went over and talked to him and Susie some more before we left. And I have to say, they're the most wonderful people. They're really, and they're very, everything is organized around their family. So Tucker loves his kids, he loves his family, and, they've built their home, so they go back and forth between Maine and Florida, and they've built their home so their kids and the grandkids and, so everything organizes around the family, and I think I think they're 2 people who really understand what's important in life. And I'm jealous because he figured out how to do what he does without using email, and I'd give anything to so and he reads enormous amounts of stuff, and he's got a great team. They
Mm.
have a beautiful team, so I don't.
For me, because especially when the whole when, like the last elections with Trump, he was one of the guys who probably I wouldn't say maybe got him elected, but probably he has a good big
Yeah,
role in it.
yeah. So there
But
was
your message is completely different to what he believed or believes still, right?
right, right. Although, I've been watching some of the coverage he's done, like the interview with Steve Bannon, and it was really funny. There were some magical moments when I was talking to him. He said, when I was on Fox, I had to interview these people I didn't like, and now that I do my own thing, I can just interview the people I like or people I wanna learn from, and I like it much more." And then because I think he's a very he's a nice person. Anyway, so there was one other thing, was it? Oh, I was talking about how the hardest thing in life is you have to look in the mirror and say, "I'm the patsy." So I was talking about being the assistant secretary and not understanding the mortgage fraud. And then once I faced it, having to realize, I'd been tricked. And he said, "You were tricked. I said it was a good idea to go to war with Iraq." So I think in the interview he did with Steve, he's talking about, uh, I don't think it's a good idea, and he's really making a very brave effort to try and persuade the president to not go to war. So, and it wouldn't surprise me if it's that he was doing that because of what happened on Iraq. Now, there was one of the best articles I ever read on the Trump victory this time around was how Trump won the manosphere. And it was basically talking about how Trump did Tucker, he did Rogan, he did all of these podcasts and really appealed to the people who hate the DEI and all that kind of stuff. And that was sort of the culture wars where I think Trump did do a good job, and people are happy to have that turn. So, I don't know, I think,
But it also makes me a little bit suspicious then.
what do you mean?
Well, for me, and obviously I can be wrong, but for me, and I think for you as well, was quite obvious from the beginning that Trump wasn't one of the good guys who's here to save us or like brings really something different. I thought he was just an accelerator of the plans already.
Right,
Yeah, what do you think
right.
as well? But then you have like Joe Rogan and you have like Tucker Carlson, like really big platforms, have really big platforms, and they know the game, I would say, because they opposed the Hillarys and the Bidens and whatever, um, and and the whole COVID situation and stuff.
So here's the problem, and this is why I hate the presidential election every 4 years. You get in the situation where you and I know that Trump is gonna be an accelerator. At the same time, do you really want Kamala Harris to be president? So you have somebody there who's worse. Do you know what I mean? And then you get into this process where you're fighting as to, is it gonna be the accelerator? Is it gonna be somebody worse? And then everybody says, "Oh, this is much better." And it's true, it is better. But, and suddenly you're spending a whole lot of time and money in the wrong conversation, and people get caught up in it. So,
Hmm.
I don't know. I think, if you look at what Tucker's been doing on the war, it's very brave.
Oh, I definitely believe so.
Right.
The interview with Ted Cruz was painful, but
Oh,
also
you know something? That was absolutely fantastic. In fact, we made Tucker pushback of the week, so he's gonna be pushback of the week for that interview
oh yeah.
next week. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we every week on the Slayer Report, we have hero of the week, and then we have pushback of the week or action of the week. Anyway, he's gonna be pushback of the week. But you know something? He absolutely nailed Ted Cruz, and Ted Cruz deserves to be taken to the woodshed 50 times over for that. I mean, that was so perfect.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
also painful, yeah, to see like I'm
Yeah, it's painful for me as an American, I'm humiliated,
yeah, and but
you know?
also painful to see that there's a lot of people apparently think that way, that uh, think it's okay to do stuff that Israel does in Gaza because one of like a religious book says it's a good idea to do so, right? That for me that was so painful. Like, oh, that's the way people really think. That brainwashed, and maybe he's not even brainwashed and he just plays it really well. But
I don't know what Ted Cruz really thinks, or if he does. I mean, I think the message was he doesn't think.
no,
So, I mean, if you declare, well, they didn't even bother to declare war, but if you go to war killing, and spending billions and billions of dollars dropping bombs on a country, maybe you should know a little bit about it.
what do you think that will happen in the Middle East in the next couple of weeks, months?
Um, my expectation is, first of all, I don't think we know. I think the situation is very fluid, and the big question for all of us is how do you operate? How do you operate a business? How do you grow a family? How do you build a life in a world where everything is in flux all the time? And so we're in a state of perpetual flux, and we're going to be that way. But I think what's going to happen is you're going to start seeing. So Trump just announced it's fine if the Chinese buy Iranian oil. It's like no sanctions. What? So I think what you're seeing everybody cut deals behind the scenes. And they're all trying to figure out, okay, how can we cut the deals and keep the resources and money flowing so this all works for us? And so I think you're going to see a lot of deal making across all the different groups and sectors. And then you're going to see stablecoins roll out in the fourth quarter, and we'll see if it resuscitates the dollar or not.
Just at the same time as they will start doing the CBDCs in Europe, right?
Right.
Around this, so that's like also
Right. So
global.
stablecoins are just going to be private CBDCs is what my expectation is. The and you see a lot of these digital gold systems being marketed as well. But remember the trick here is, you can make digital control work with Mastercard. You can make it work with your other credit cards. You can make it work with your bank. You can make it, and what you want to avoid is an all digital system. Stopping CBDCs doesn't do it. You can, if it's an all digital system, you can do the control grid.
Wil jij ontdekken hoe je jouw leven radicaal kunt transformeren? Op donderdag 13 november komt Dr. Bruce Lipton, wereldberoemd celbioloog en auteur van The Biology of Belief, naar Rotterdam Ahoy voor een exclusieve livelezing. Unlock Your Potential. Tijdens deze avond deelt Dr. Lipton zijn inzichten over de kracht van overtuigingen, zelfheling en hoe jij je realiteit kunt beïnvloeden. Tijdens deze avond leer je ook hoe je beperkende patronen doorbreekt en de regie over je eigen leven terugpakt. Heel nodig in deze tijd. Let op, de kaartverkoop gaat super hard. Dus wil je deze kans niet missen, ga dan nu naar events.that'saspirit.nu en verzeker jezelf van een plekje nu nog kan. Ik hoop je daar te zien.
I know we talked about it last time, but I think it's really good to at least talk about it today one more time. It can be short as well. Like we were talking about the stablecoins, but then a lot of people who see that the stablecoins are doing this or are going to use for this goal, they will say, but then we all have to use Bitcoin because Bitcoin is the solution for all our financial
You can use
problems.
Bitcoin to do it. You can use Bitcoin to do it. Now, if you look at what the plans are for Bitcoin, they're clearly planning on pumping them. And I think they want to use Bitcoin to essentially engineer the land grab in the United States. So Larry Fink at Davos said we can take it to 700, or implied it would go as high as 700,000. So where is it today? It's last time I looked, it's about 107.
Yeah.
Okay. So he's saying we can take, so I think the goal is take it as high as you can, swap it for land, because you've got a sovereign wealth fund set up in the United States, and now you've got a congressional process that says we're going to sell 250 million acres of the land in the 11 western states because the federal government owns a lot of the land. If you set it up so you can swap it, you pump Bitcoin, you swap it for the land, and then you can let Bitcoin crash. And now you've got the land, and
So
and
the governments own the land. The BlackRocks buy a lot of Bitcoin. I mean,
Pump it up
yeah,
and
because the
swap it.
retail is only a small amount of all the Bitcoin
Right.
available, so it's the Black Rocks and stuff. The micro strategies and stuff. They own it,
Right.
and then they buy land from the government.
They swap it. So they swap the Bitcoin for land because Trump has created a Bitcoin strategic reserve. And here's the problem. So Bitcoin is fundamentally a Ponzi scheme. That's what it is. And it was initially designed to be a payment system, but it got hijacked. So, and we have a great interview with Steve Patterson, who is the co-author of the book with Roger Ver called Hijacking Bitcoin. And it explains how it got converted into something that's basically an asset play, which is a pump and dump. But a Ponzi scheme only works if you have new money always coming in. So you need new money coming in. And the reality is the whales can't get out unless you have big new money coming in. And the perfect new money to come in, the only money that's big enough is government. So if you can set it up so you can swap for real assets or you can get the government to buy, then as a whale, you can get out. You need that new the problem is once you put the government in it, what keeps it going? Now, in theory, the central banks could pump and keep it pumped, so there's some people who really follow Bitcoin who say no. After they swap it, they'll keep floating it, and they might. I think they'll probably let it crash. And part of this is they want to set up those swaps so that when they put it into real estate, it's tax free. So if you're a whale and you can swap your Bitcoin for land at a 700,000 value and do it tax free, that's how the whales get out. So if you look at and there's a commentary that I wrote about it, but if you look at what RFK floated at Bitcoin 2024, he floated the plan, which is, letting Bitcoin be swapped for real estate tax free. And that way the big early whales can get out of Bitcoin because their problem now is if they try and get out to crash the market. So
Because they have too much share.
yeah,
And
they just have huge positions.
yeah.
So it won't if you're trying to pump the market up, you don't want the whale selling into that because it's gonna kill you. So we have a piece at Solari called Bitcoin Bailout. And I will say this, I think the book Hijacking Bitcoin is really good because it shows you how something that could have been a great payment system got converted into a pump and dump tool. And it's too bad, but you know.
I have a theory about this. Maybe you can tell me what you think about it. That Bitcoin, I mean, they started Bitcoin, and from Bitcoin, the popularity of Bitcoin, then they saw, oh, that's nice, but now let's make stable coins, different coins, whatever. And people getting used to the Bitcoin because Bitcoin is getting so big, then they're accepting and adopting the different cryptos as well. So the only reason, so Bitcoin was here for a reason. I think it was in an NSA paper or something like that as well, right? Bitcoin, the
So, yeah,
technology behind it.
so I think there's still controversy, and I don't think there's a way of proving exactly where it came from. But here's what I saw happen. I think they knew the dollar system was long in the tooth, and they needed to resuscitate it, and they wanted the control grid. And the best way to figure out how to do an all digital system with digital currency is to have, the private entrepreneurs prototype it. That's what they always do. So we were talking about Tim Wu's book, The Master Switch, innovation, wham, central control, innovation. So I think they put Bitcoin and a lot of other things out because they wanted to do everything they could to encourage that innovation before they were ready to lock down control. So I think I think this came top down from the beginning.
So, and then, for example, like a company like MicroStrategy would be able, like, let's say in 2-3 years, Bitcoin would be up in the 750,000.
If
Then,
they do this, I mean, that's what just because Larry Fink said something at Davos doesn't mean it's gonna happen, right? I mean, that's why I wanna be careful because anybody listening to this, you know, this is a speculative tool,
Mhm.
and you need to know how to manage a speculative position. because a speculative position could not work and it could go to nothing. Just like the stable coins, the stable coins could come out and all their plans could not work. So it's it's unbelievably fluid.
Mm.
Right.
But it's good to know because I think there's a lot of people who really believe or hope maybe that Bitcoin will be the alternative of all CBDCs and whatnot.
No, it's just gonna here's the thing, you can run the control grid using Bitcoin just like I go back to all digital. As long as it's digital, 100% digital system, you can do a control grid. I don't care if it's MasterCard, I don't care if it's your bank, I don't care if it's, Visa, I don't care if it's Venmo, I don't, any any system that is 100% digital can be turned into a control grid. That's what you have to understand.
So there's never a solution in any kind of cryptocurrency then, or there's always a risk.
Okay, so here's the problem. We don't have a problem. There's nothing inherently wrong with crypto.
No.
Okay. We have a secret governance system on planet Earth, and that governance system has a lot more power and force than we do, and their intentions for us are not so wonderful. That's our problem. Our problem is dealing with a secret governance system. So anytime you put another weapon in the hands of the secret governance system, you're making life worse for you. This has nothing to do with crypto or technology, right? Okay. So how do we cope with stopping Mr. Global from getting complete control and putting us into a slavery model? That's okay. So one of the ways you do that is you keep a balance between analog and digital. Right? So you don't go to a 100 digital system. Now, you want your digital system to be wonderful. So if you want crypto, here's what you do. First of all, you create lots of networks where you don't have to go through Amazon Cloud or Google Cloud or whatever. So maybe you create lots of mesh networks. But the other thing you do, and I told you this the last time we talked, it's one of my favorite ideas ever from Bill Binney. So Bill Binney was the top technical director at NSA. You got to be really smart. And what he said is, he said, we should teach all the homeschoolers to teach cryptography and encryption to the kids. And he said, if you have lots of local encryption systems that the kids are making and cycling them around and constantly changing them, he said, it'll drive them crazy. They can't deal with it. So you need to be using encryption and creating, private networks, and that's the advantage of doing local crypto, or use any crypto you want, but do local systems and local encryption. And then you keep a portion analog, right? To me, that's the ideal system. So you want wonderful crypto, but you want wonderful analog too. So, and part of it is we need to celebrate the analog world. So I was just at a wonderful conference in the US. Um, and a guy spoke who does a podcast with Scott Galloway, who apparently it's one of the top business podcasts in America. And he's 26 years old. He's a Brit. And Galloway, who's a business professor at NYU, just asked him to do it with him. I think his name is Ed Elson. And he said, I'm Generation Z. I'm 26 years old. I'm Generation Z. And he said, if you look at how we spend our time, and you count our time in days, we spend approximately 100 days a year sleeping, and then we spend 109 days looking at a screen,
Blah.
usually our phone. And he said, what that means is we have 40% less time for life than your generation. So we were Generation X and boomers in the audience. And he said that means we have 40% less time for life. We don't have time to buy and take care of a house. We're too busy looking at our screen. That's not having a healthy analog life, right?
No.
So you need that. We need that balance. And my question is not, when I look at something like crypto, is not crypto good or bad. It's like, how does crypto interact between me and Mr. Global to give me an edge, right?
Mhm.
And that's not crypto itself. It's, what networks are you using to manage the crypto? What encryption systems are you using to transact? How are you keeping privacy and secret? Do you really want lavender to know all your transactions?
I'd rather not.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So, I mean, there is if you look at the ability to extract value from each and every one of us, the less privacy we have, the more extraction is happening.
But look at how much time of our lives are being wasted to screens and to distractions. Like imagine um, people using that time to create like a different storyline, create like something completely different. Wow, that would immediately, well, not maybe not immediately, but it will
So
change the change coming from that.
so one of the things we have at Solari, we have a building wealth curriculum, and in the building wealth curriculum, we have something called the learning plan. And it's to get particularly young people to focus on, what is all the knowledge in the world and what knowledge do I want to go get? And how do I use my time to get it? And one of the things we encourage people to do as part of that is a time budget. Because if you think inflation hits your money, inflation hits your time even worse. And right now, um, in this period of flux, with everything in flux, the the system is gonna start stealing and clawing at your time. And so thinking strategically about where am I gonna use my time? How am I gonna use my time? There's nothing more important because time is gonna be your precious resource.
That's when I get like also hopeful at the same time as well when we talk about stuff like this. Is that okay? When you only focus on Mr. Global and what they're doing, what they're trying to achieve.
You want more water?
Yes, please. Um, then you can get like it can get dark. But then at the same time, if you see how much, thank you, how much space there's still left for us to improve
Mhm.
and do better, that's also insane.
So if you don't get tricked, if you don't go for the gaslighting and you capture your time. So we had a quote that we just did an interview on mind control with Josh Dahman, which is amazing. And we had a quote from an Italian revolutionary. It said, "The new has not yet been born. The old refuses to die. Now is the time of monsters." And that describes where we are. And so what we need to do is build the new. Now, it's very it's very it's very easy to spend too much time watching the monsters because you know one and you always need to know when and how to duck. so, so I'm not saying don't track the monsters, but we need to spend time building the new. And I told you our favorite quote from last year was the currency of the future will be relationships of trust. It won't be money in the world we're going into. It's not going to be money. It's going to be people. And so, the way you build the new is one trustworthy relationship after another, and you just start small and you build. And that's what we've got to stay. We've got to protect your time and build the new. Because and you're seeing it. People are saying, I can't go into the hospital system. In the United States, you're risking your life if you go in. So, how am I going to get health care? How am I going to get food? How am I going to get and people are building the new, and that's what we're going to have to do. And even if it starts with tiny, those tiny mustard seeds, that's what we're going to have to do.
Yeah, yeah. I just shared an article on my Instagram, I think a week ago, where it stated that people in the Netherlands are getting vaccinated less and less and less, and it's a really big problem. Well, it's not a problem; it's really good, but they they say it's a really problem. Is how you interpreted that article. Um, But then I got a lot of people in my DM like, "Oh yeah, but this scares me as well." But because what they're probably going to do is they're going to enforce vaccines on the kids because in Belgium they already do it.
Right.
I'm not sure which one, but one is you need to the kids need to get it, and otherwise you get fines and stuff like insane. We don't have it yet in the Netherlands, but they are afraid that like articles like this will make that happen. And I'm like, let them because like we need to like for like COVID was such a good example as well. So many people got hit by it, which is super bad and like really horrible for like the people got hit by it. but then it woke them up really fast, like really fast. And sometimes really it needs to get so much in our face, the whole Mr. Global stuff, that we're like, okay, but this too far,
Right.
right?
So here's the thing, this is not going away. If you look at so mRNA technology, which is what more and more of the vaccines are becoming, clearly includes mysterious ingredients. There's not full disclosure of what's in it, and there's not informed consent, let alone of why they want these mysterious ingredients in our body. We can theorize all day long about what that's all about, but at the same time, they're gonna keep pushing, and we're gonna keep saying, "No, we wanna be healthy. We don't wanna die." And so, at some point, the government can't say, as a sovereign government that is collecting taxes, "We have the right to poison, maim, and kill you." That that's not in their scope of authority. And that's what's gonna have to come out, what's gonna have to happen is the lies have to diminish and diminish and diminish and diminish until finally the government official says, "I'm under military orders to put this in your veins, and I have no choice but to follow military orders." At which point we can say, those orders are not and that military is not legitimate, and we're not gonna fund it. I mean, ultimately, the question is, are we gonna continue to fund the government's intentionally poisoning us and our families? So
But that's a difficult one, right? Like, how do you stop funding the government?
so, um, I think the first way you stop funding the government is you start bringing it up and helping people connect the dots between their money and what's happening with the government. Because a lot of the legitimacy gets pulled out of government when you bring up the money issue. Because this is not you, the government, doing this. You are doing this with my money, and you are doing something that makes it harder for me to earn the money I'm supposed to give you. Do you know what I mean? So if the government is destroying my ability to generate an income, including the taxes that I owe the government, they're putting me in a double bind. And if you look at how the laws work, that's not, there's all sorts of legal precedent to say that, not only does that practically not make sense, but that's not how the law works. So, so I think the first thing is you just bring up the conversation. Now, I do think in the United States, which is where I've looked at it, there are ways under the Constitution for the states to work with citizens to literally escrow the tax money under state control. Because it's not, under the Constitution, it's not okay to give money that's being spent illegally. So the federal government is way outside the laws, the financial management laws of how money is allowed to be spent and how it's supposed to be managed. They're breaking the law by a lot. It's significant, and massive amounts of money is disappearing. And so the state attorney generals under the Constitution and given their powers have in theory the power to do something about that. And not say, "Oh, we're not paying taxes," but basically escrow the taxes and make sure that money can only be spent in legal ways. So, they have a responsibility, both the citizens and the state attorney generals have the responsibility to enforce, um, and under the Constitution, the state powers are superior to the federal government. In many areas, the powers not delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states. And this is the big battle. And the problem is the federal government is using its ability to borrow an infinite amount of money to basically buy the states off. So there's a new provision in the new tax reconciliation bill or budget reconciliation bill that that the states can't enforce against AI for 10 years. And there was a huge explosion about it. Now they're coming back and saying, you only have to agree to the provision if you want 500 billion of the access to 500 billion of the broadband money. So once again, they're trying to buy them into something that is destroying their sovereignty with money. So I think I told you the last time we talked, one of the senators from Idaho is just a great guy, said to me, he said, "Every year we send $1 to Washington, and every year we get $1.19 back. And every year I say to my constituents, I want to enforce the Constitution. And they say, I'd rather have the 19 cents. So, the states get federal education money that requires you to teach your children how to be sex slaves. But if the constituents want the money, what do you do?
It's like everything is about the money, yeah?
No, the money, um, the fundamental goals of the system are strategic, but money is the resource allocation train tracks and part of the control system. So money has been the primary basis of the control system up until now. And the reason they want to go to the all digital control system is, and the kill control grid, is it's not enough. It's not going to be good enough to give the kind of complete control that digital technology will now allow.
Isn't China already quite far in the whole CBD? They already use CBDC, yeah?
They've used CBDC, but it hasn't really gone. So I don't think it has a major adoption yet, from what I know. And I've gotten reports that somewhat they've backed off of the social credit system. It was far from perfect, but I think they're under very tight surveillance and control. So,
The Chinese
yeah.
with the social credit score already kind of implemented.
So I think they're much further along in an all digital transaction system and much further along with, sort of integrating surveillance into control.
Spooky shit.
hmm Now, what's interesting is a lot of entrepreneurs have told me they feel far freer in China, but I'm not sure I believe them because so many people want to get out and come to the West. So, and I used to live in Hong Kong, and if you look at what Hong Kong feels like now that the PRC has come in, it's just terrible. I mean, you go from a place that was so free, so open, so innovative, and so much fun to something that's just like creepy. Feels hideous.
So what do you think? Like, I can't imagine the whole CBDC stuff will work, but at the same time, you see with Palantir and stuff, it goes really fast as well at the same time. Do you think they will be able to implement all of this?
I think the whole thing is going to fail.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the question is, I don't know when, I don't know how. What concerns me is how much damage can occur before it fails. Because you really, what's going to happen is as people are just going to decide, I'm not doing this. And they're, when you're in a system and you're fighting with a person who doesn't fear death, you need a certain, we need 2 to 5% of the population who says, I'm not afraid of death. I'm not doing this. So, um,
Aren't we there already yet, you think?
I we're close. We're close. I mean, I've been there since 1998, so it's hard for me to tell, because that I first hit that moment in 1998.
But you must have seen like the world changes. I mean, obviously more totalitarian as well, but obviously also you have to notice like I think I noticed from COVID or only from COVID on already, the massive amounts of people waking up to this. And I can imagine from like the 80s, 90s.
So I see a massive amount of people waking up, and I also see a massive amount of people in the professional class waking up. At the same time, I see in the United States a bifurcation between, you have 30% of the population that seems to be relatively not mind controlled and is not, considers the official narrative a bunch of bunk. And then 70% that just says, you know, I'm going to live in the official narrative because I'm busy and I'm tired and, I don't want to deal with it. So you have a bifurcation between the people who seem to be not so, they're just not susceptible to the mind control. So I don't know. It's very, it's very, And the other thing you see in the United States is they're just hitting wave after wave. I mean, if you're running a small business and you get hit by tariffs, and then you get hit by war, and then you get hit by, do you know what I mean? The wave after wave of change and how it eats up your time. You don't have time to think profoundly about these issues.
Yeah, you need
Right,
time, right?
right, right.
But you're hopeful for what's coming, or not,
What do you mean? I'm hopeful.
for like change in a good way, maybe.
So I think if you go back through the history of freedom, it's always a small group of people who kind of lead the push. And for the first time in my life, I'm seeing that group emerge, and that's very hopeful. Um, my assessment of why this will fail is if you look at how the world works. I don't know if we talked about this. My favorite book last year was a book called A New Science of Heaven by Dr. Robert Temple. Did we talk
No, I
about
don't
that?
think so.
Okay. So, Temp Temple has spent his whole life studying plasma, and 99% of the universe is made up of plasma. It's the fundamental building block of the universe. And what Temple says, and I've seen other physicists who used to say this, but what he says, and I believe he's right, is plasma is alive and it's intelligent. So, it's basically saying the universe is alive and intelligent. And if you look at Mr. Global's plans to control everything, the internet of bodies, the internet of forests, the internet of, everything, good luck trying to control the entire universe. You know what I mean? And if you look at how intelligence works, one of the reasons that markets when they work are so profoundly wonderful is it accesses that intelligence. It's so open, it's so free. And the reason free speech works is you collect up and share the intelligence of everybody and everything. It's really open. And if you look at this control model, it's just so contradictory. I keep saying this, but I'll repeat it. It's so contradictory the way life works. So good luck with digitizing and controlling everything. It's just a cluster, you know what? It's not going to work. But you can kill a lot of people and make a mess before it fails. And I guess, a tiny group of people can live alone in a very controlled atmosphere with no bumblebees at some point, but
So it goes so like it's so contrary to like what nature would like to do. Like, and that's the whole thing, right? The people, Mr. Global or the people behind it, they lost. That's what I believe. Touch with nature, with like the bigger picture of what we're doing here.
you have so many people who are so completely out of touch. It's unbelievable. And I used to be one of them, so I know, you know, I I never thought of myself then as out of touch. And now when I look back, I think, "Ugh, I was so out of touch." But, yeah, they're very, very out of touch. So but, they get away with it. If you keep getting away with it, then you keep doing it. So,
Until nature or the bigger picture or the bigger thing or plasma or whatever says no.
well, there what we're watching, though, is, the old system won't work, so we have to go to a new system, and that's why I think it's important to understand that this is an invention. We're all in the invention room together, and Mr. Global has his issues and concerns and is doing whatever he's doing, but he's not the only vote, right? So we're all in the invention room, and that's why the more that 2 to 5% emerges and takes responsibility and says, "Okay, let's invent something." We can do something that's a little bit more wonderful than what Mr. Global is planning here, so let's get in the invention room, and I think that's why it's so important to stop wasting time on things like presidential campaigns and start getting into real change. That's what I would love to see happen. And not worry about, the official narrative's a bunch of bunk, but, if you go into reality, how are we gonna build a reality that's worth living in? So, we all have a responsibility to do that.
I think that's a perfect ending to this episode, don't you think?
Yeah. Yeah, we've run out of really gruesome things to talk about.
So then let's end positive, yeah? Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Jorn.
Thank you guys for watching as well. Catherine and I will go on for a little while recording Uncensored, and Uncensored you can watch it on the streaming platform of That's the Spirit. So if you're watching there, super nice. Just click it and watch this Uncensored and all the other Uncensored. If you're not, move to www.thatspirit.nu and you can check this Uncensored. You can see all the Truman shows without advertisements. You can check a lot of movies, podcasts, and stuff, everything that you will like. Thank you for watching. Hopefully, see you soon at Uncensored, and otherwise, see you next week. Ciao.